and thank you, Doug, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for the invitation to speak here. It's been a little while since I've been at the NSCA National Conference, but it's good to see some old friends, rekindle some friendships, and have an opportunity to work with you all. I know that there's some kind of paperwork and administrative stuff I've got to get through, and while I do have a number of conflicts in my life and conflicts of interest, none of them actually relate to this presentation, so I think we're free to go. So let's get into it, and let's talk a little bit about sport performance. Let's talk about the Winter Olympic Games and kind of what it is that we can do and that we do at the U.S. Olympic Committee to help support our elite athletes in chasing their goals and their dreams of standing on the podium, hopefully, and representing Team USA at those Olympic Games that come around once every 4 years. I work with a team of talented sports scientists, both within the USOC as part of our sport performance division, but also externally, and some of you are actually in the room, as kind of network service providers who are equally as important in kind of what it is that we're doing to support Team USA and our athletes' efforts to have success at the Olympic Games. So thank you for that. There are 8 winter national governing bodies, from biathlon to bobsled to curling and figure skating and speed skating. We'll go through all of them a little bit in just a little bit. But all of them are a little bit different in the way that the USOC supports them from a sport performance standpoint, and that's sports science, sports medicine, logistical and strategic planning support. It differs. Ski and snowboard, for example, has a tremendous infrastructure on their staff already, strength and conditioning coaches, sports medicine providers, and we fill in around the edges, filling in where we can with dietetic support, some sports psychology assistance. Whereas some of the smaller national governing bodies, we take on an actual larger role and are the primary providers in areas like strength and conditioning and some of the other sports science disciplines. So my goals today, in terms of talking with you and kind of what we'll go through, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview about the USOC and our sport performance division, recognizing that some of you are already very familiar with it and others maybe this is new, so we'll spend a minute to touch base there. And then I will talk with you about the ways that our sport performance team, our sports science team, actually interacts with the athletes and engages with them to produce results on the field of play at the Olympic Games. So before we go into that, and I want to, I guess, set the stage, set the mood, and have a little bit of a video, relive some of the performances from the Olympic Games in PyeongChang just several months ago. So every time I've seen that video probably 100 times, every time I see it, I well up a little bit, both from the pride that I have in the athletes that went there and achieved such phenomenal things, but equally for those athletes that didn't accomplish their goals of getting on the podium and being there. It's at the same time awe-inspiring and lights a fire to go back and get it done and help more Team USA's athletes get to that place where they are standing on the podium. The Olympic Games are unlike any other event in the world, and I feel confident saying that, having been to a number of them and a number of other sporting events, and we'll kind of talk and give a feel for why that is the case as we go through the presentation. But now I've gotten you all fired up, I'm going to kind of dial it back for a second and go through some of the boring things about the USOC and who we are and what we do. But I think it's important to kind of put a filter around this and put it in perspective as to how we work with the different national governing bodies, how we work with the athletes to impact performance. So the USOC has a mission statement that you can read just as easily as I can, but to support the Olympic and Paralympic movement by creating sustained competitive excellence and demonstrating the values of the Olympic movement and thereby inspiring all Americans. That drives the entire organization. Our sport performance team, which includes sports science and sports medicine, abides by this mission as well, but over the last 4 years have had 3 strategic key operational objectives that we've kind of used as our filter in how we engage with the sports and what we fund, what we support with the athletes. The first is to help develop a high-performance infrastructure, supporting athlete high performance. That can be coaches, investing in coaches, trying to bring in best-in-world coaches. It can be facilities. It can be all those pieces that surround an athlete that support their performance. It's about health and wellness of the team. Initiatives that put better care, better medical support around the athletes with the idea that if we can send a healthy Team USA to any Olympic Games, we're going to be in the mix for contending for the overall and the gold medal count when we're done. And the third is targeting resources. There's never enough money, there's never enough service, there's never enough support to go around to give everyone what it is that they feel they need to be able to achieve success. So it's about identifying and strategically investing and putting that support around athletes in order to maximize performance and maximize outcome in those events where we think that we have the greatest opportunities at the Olympic Games. And so that's a little bit about the USOC and what we do and how we're structured. The winter sports, as I said, is a pretty diverse group of sports when you really stop and think about it. There's not a lot of commonalities that you can weave between these sports when you think about it, other than they're all contested on ice and snow. You've got the aerobic animals, from the cross-country athletes and the biathletes to the pure strength and power athletes, the bobsledders that need to accelerate a 400-pound sled off the line as quickly as possible. You've got the strategy, and believe it or not, the fitness that comes with curling, the grace and strength that goes with figure skating, the physicality and strength that goes with ice hockey, all the acrobatics and the different disciplines in ski and snowboard, the technique and the physiology and the physical speed. And then you've got luge, which is kind of a different animal all by itself, a different level of craziness, but spans the continuum of physical and physiological capabilities and needs that the athletes have. So we engage with each NGB, with each national governing body in a different way, based on what it is that it takes to succeed there and based on what their needs are from a performance standpoint. You can see a little bit. I want to spend a minute talking about some of the results in PyeongChang, again, because I understand as I go through and tell some of the stories about how we engage, understand a little bit more about that relationship and the connection with what has been done from a support standpoint to what the results are that are seen on the field of play. We went to the Olympic Games and we won 23 medals, which was fourth in the medal standings, both from the overall medal count as well as the gold medal count. And the breakdown of the sports that won the medals and how many they won is shown up here on the screen. We obviously don't go to any Olympic Games and have the expectation or have the goal of finishing fourth. So we felt at the time going into the Games, and in retrospect still believe, that we had a team that was capable of doing better than what the medal count shows. And we'll talk about some of the stories of the athletes. But even within that, we had some phenomenal performances and some things that had never been done at the Games before. Jesse Diggins and Keegan Randall, the athletes shown here on the, see if this works, up in the upper left, won the first ever cross-country medal for women's cross-country skiing at an Olympic Games, and the first ever gold medal in cross-country skiing for Team USA. And if you saw that race, you know how phenomenal it was and what a great performance you saw from those two women. We saw the women's hockey team bring the gold medal back to the United States for the first time since 1998, the first time that it was contested as an event at the Olympic Games. And we saw the men's curling team bring home a gold medal, the first time ever for Team USA. And that was spectacular. So with that said, the medal table doesn't tell everything. And I apologize, when I put this slide together, it made more sense to me and was a little bit clearer. Now it comes across as a little bit jumbled. But what you're looking at is kind of the nations in the top, or that finished 1 through 10 in the medal count. You've got first, second, third, fourth, blah, blah, blah here. Place finishes and how we did in each one of those areas. Total medals, where you see we finished fourth. But then the 4th through 6th places, where Team USA was first by a large margin over its competitors. And those 4th through 8th place finishes, again, we had more athletes finishing off the podium, but in that top 8 than any other country. Which leads you to think, man, we were close. What does it take? What is it going to, what are we going to need to do in the next 4 years in order to make some of those 4ths into 3rds or 2nds and some of those 8ths into bronzes? And while this presentation isn't meant to go into kind of all the lessons learned, if we have time at the end and you have questions around that, I'm happy to kind of talk with you through some of those things and what it is that we've tried to uncover about how we did in PyeongChang, so we can apply those lessons going forward to our performances in subsequent games. Let's talk about some of the stories and the sport performance team that surrounds these athletes. I had the privilege, as I told you, of working with a team that involves strength and conditioning professionals, one of whom is here in the back, Brandon Cycle. got strength and conditioning coaches in Colorado Springs and Lake Placid that supplement what's in place with the national governing bodies. We have sports psychology, again, working on the mental side of things just as much as the physical side. Technology team and a technology initiative, a tech and innovation group that's come on board to provide resources and funding against technology that's going to support athlete performance on both the summer and winter sides. Nutrition, dietetics, a lot being done in that area, and we have a dietitian on our team that has built a network of providers that support the majority of Team USA's athletes. Exercise physiology, understanding the body, the energy systems, but also looking at things like environmental conditions and their impact on performance. Sports medicine, supporting the health of the athletes, performance analysis, digging into the analytics to support performance, and then we also have a significant amount of work in what we do around strategic planning and helping the national governing bodies in the sport put together a plan that's going to support performance throughout the quad. We'll go through each one of these areas and just provide a story or two and an example of two about kind of how the USOC has supported and the national governing bodies have supported the athletes' performances. I'll be honest with you, some of this isn't going to come across as being rocket science, but it's the practical aspect and the practical application of sports science and trying to impact performance. Sport dietetics is one of the areas that we saw as a priority and made a significant investment in through the 2014 to 2018 quad. And we moved from probably about roughly between 30 and 40% of the athletes representing Team USA in 2014 receiving quality, regular, consistent dietetics support to over 90% of the athletes that were representing Team USA in PyeongChang having that in their back pocket as a resource and service that they could fall back on. Some of that was done through our own USOC dietetics providers. A lot of it was done by building out a sport dietetics network. So engaging dietitians around the country that would be embedded with specific teams, provide service and support that they were actually then able to carry through to the Olympic Games, providing support in the moment at the Olympics as well. We developed a chef program that allowed chefs to travel with teams to specific locations, specific competitions throughout the year, especially in places where they knew that food was challenging and nutrition was challenging. So giving them that resource. And then in the actual games environment itself, we did something that we'd never done before. We built out 2 food service centers. One to service the sports that were in the mountains, another to service the sports that were participating in the coast. The ability to give every Team USA athlete performance-focused food in a healthy environment, a place that we could control things hopefully better than other places, germs, illness, cut down on that, and get food served from familiar faces that the athletes were used to seeing at the Olympic Training Center throughout the course of the year. It was a tremendous success and something that was, I believe, impacted performance of the athletes during the games. The real stories go beyond this and are actually found in the interactions that we had with the individual athletes. So just to give you one specific example here, this is our women's bobsled team of Lauren Gibbs and Alana Myers-Taylor, won the silver medal at the games in the 2-woman bobsled. But the International Bobsled Federation instituted a rule early on in this past quadrennium where they were going to put a weight restriction on the total amount of weight of the athletes in the sled of what they could be. The idea being that, hey, we're going to kind of open the door for more nations who maybe don't have as big and as strong as women as Team USA or as Canada do. We're going to give them an opportunity to gain some more level footing and a chance to compete at World Cups and at the Olympic Games. So that's great, maybe for the sport. Presents a little bit of a challenge for us. The weight limit was 750 pounds. The sled itself weighs close to 400 pounds, which means that 2 strong, powerful women had to meet a weight limit that could be challenging based on who it was that you put in the sleds. So our dietitian worked with Lauren and Alana throughout the course of the year, not just to give them education and advice, but on a weekly, monthly basis, providing feedback and interaction and helping guide them as well as the coaches make decisions around weight and how to manage that so you never had to lose or cut weight quickly. They could stay at a healthy performance weight and carry that through into the games. So as a result. And again, what I'm talking about, these aren't the reasons why athletes win the medals. They're phenomenally talented and they put in great work and receive great coaching. But what it is that we do as a sport performance team helps support that. And this team went on and won a silver medal in PyeongChang. I'm going to talk a little bit about curling too, because this is a kind of a unique story. Again, it's not going to get categorized under kind of groundbreaking sports science interaction. But when you think about curling, it's not a sport that you ever probably would associate with nutrition, and nutrition being an important part of their performance. This past 4-year cycle, we saw a revolution go on within the curling community and a professionalism brought to the sport that involves sports science and sports medicine being applied more stringently across the athlete pool. And dietetics was a part of that. For those of you who don't follow curling, and at least at one point was a lot of people, their games can last for 3 hours. And our history at Team USA was that as the match went on, we seemed to be less capable of executing those important shots. So we did a simple thing of monitoring blood glucose throughout the course of simulated matches, and we found that depending on the athlete, not everybody, we could see significant drop-offs in their blood glucose levels. And just a simple monitoring of that and being able to feed that back could put them on schedules, refueling schedules, and a plan that during the course of the game, they could be working to keep those glucose levels where they needed to be. In addition to that, these athletes can compete over 10, 12 times in a 10-day span at the Olympic Games, and that recovery and that food and ongoing over a long period of time becomes critically important. These athletes were brought into our teaching kitchen that we have at the training center, taught how to cook their own food. And it was amazing to see them at the Olympic trials in Omaha this year, actually doing that, cooking their own food and good food, not just I'm going to throw hot dogs in the microwave or cook pasta every day. They owned that, and they brought it to how it is that they approached sport and sport performance. So we saw a big result, a big change. We saw the men win a gold medal. We saw the women perform better than they have in the last 3 games and actually continue that on, where we now have 2 women's teams ranked in the top 10 in the world in the standings. So nutrition having an impact. Shifting gears a little bit and looking at physiology, we have one of the, I think, preeminent physiologists in Randy Wilbur working with us at the U.S. Olympic Committee. And he had an opportunity throughout the last 4 years to get in and work with some of our women cross-country athletes. So I won't get into specifics of any one particular athlete, but within the team, 3 of the athletes who are on that team are shown here. We had an athlete who had severe allergies, especially when traveling to Europe, just where most of the competitions are. We had an athlete that couldn't handle altitude. Okay? And every year, the team would do altitude training camps, and the athlete would get wiped out and never be able to rebound for the remainder of the season. We had another athlete who couldn't train in the heat, couldn't handle the heat stress. And when you're training and putting a bulk of your kind of work in over the summer, that becomes a problem. So bringing those athletes out to Colorado Springs under the watchful eye of our physiologist and our dietitian, going through testing, able to develop strategies for each of those athletes that allowed them to perform at their best, allowed the coaches to adapt their training schedules to maximize their capabilities while also not presenting obstacles in their path. Altitude training was a problem for the one. Well, we have an alternative camp that we're going to send you to during this period of time. Again, not the reason why they won their first ever medal at the Olympic Games, but probably a contributing factor. And we take pride in being able to say that I think we had a role in helping those athletes achieve something that they hadn't ever done before. We also spent a lot of time in PyeongChang. It's one of the things that we try to do is get recon and information on the lay of the land. And we had a belief that it was going to be freaking cold there, and it was. So just something as simple as heated sweatpants. Again, it's not new. We've seen other nations do this, and British cycling, I think, was one of the first back around the London Games. But allowing athletes to maintain body temperature, muscle temperature, to be able to perform hopefully at a higher level, exert more power when it actually came time to skiing down the hill. As you're seeing Michaela Schifrin here, who's donning the pants as she gets ready for one of her races, as well as the bobsled skeleton teams and helping them get prepared for their competitions. staying in the realm of ski and snowboard, I think but switching topics to talk about technology. I think one of the cooler things that happened over the quad was bringing virtual reality and virtual reality tools in a little bit more into the realm of performance. I can't see how well this is actually showing up for you, but I'll talk you through what it is. In the Super G competition, which is the second fastest of the alpine disciplines behind the downhill, the athletes never have an opportunity to ski the course before they race. The day of the race, they do get an opportunity to get on the course, but they don't ski it as if they were racing it, so that they can get a feel for the layout of the gates and kind of the terrain that they'll be navigating. However, the coaches have the opportunity the night before to ski the course, and then they bring back the information and recon and kind of share that information with their athletes. So he took a step in working with the coaches and putting essentially camera arrays, everything from 360 cameras to several smaller, more directed cameras, to record video that then got brought back, fed into a VR system that the athletes could review and take virtual runs the night before they were actually even able to get on the course. So what you see here is Michaela Schifrin and Lindsey Vonn taking those virtual runs before an actual Super G competition and gaining some familiarity with the course that their competitors weren't able to get. So, in terms of the results at the Olympic Games, unfortunately, Michaela, because of the way that the schedule had to get, because of weather throughout the games, didn't compete, but Lindsey finished 6th. This technology was used throughout the entire season, though, and we saw both the athletes use it and get on the podium during the World Cup season. So I'm really happy with how that project worked out and bringing new technology to support performance. Obviously, there's lots of areas in winter sport that involve aerodynamics, as the shape, the contours, the textures of a device from a bobsled to a speed suit in alpine skiing or speed skating all impact how well you move through the air. And that resistance or reduced resistance can mean the difference between a medal and falling outside of the top 8 even. So the bobsled team in particular had tremendous success in developing their 2-man bobsleds for the Sochi Games and had some of the fastest sleds in the world. They wanted to translate that into the 4-man sled. And so efforts were put into making a new 4-man bobsled for the men's team this year. And it wasn't so much redesigning the shape to necessarily get faster. It was redesigning the shape so that the athletes could actually fit in the sled. Athletes are getting bigger, faster, stronger every year that we go through the games. And this sled that's shown in the upper left was the one that they were kind of trying to fit athletes into at the start of the quad. And athletes literally could not, some of the bigger athletes literally could not fit. So what the efforts of the program, or what the program provided, was a bigger sled, the purple one shown here, that allowed the athletes to actually get in and ride more comfortably, although I'd argue that any bobsled ride isn't ever really that comfortable, with the same aerodynamic profile and the same drag profile as the smaller sled. So not necessarily a gain in speed, but being able to retain the same speeds, but giving more comfort and more ability for the athletes to perform at the level that they needed to. So we'll skip over that. We'll talk a little bit about strategic planning, and this isn't very fun, but it's an important part of what we do. And one of the things that we did in the year leading into the games I actually thought was pretty ingenious and gave us some information and some things to work with in preparing the team for the games. Every year, or every Olympic Games, the year prior to the games, they run test events, which is essentially a dry run of the competition. They test out the venue, they test out the staff, they make sure that everything works so that you don't show up at the Olympic Games and figure out, ooh, no one remembered to actually check to see if the timing system worked. So usually those events are scattered throughout the course of a long period of time. In PyeongChang, they actually condensed 14 events down into a period of 6 weeks. So we saw it as an opportunity for our staff to get there on the ground and do some recon and learn some things at a level that we hadn't ever been able to previously. So all of our staff in sport performance, from our sports scientists to sports medicine to some of our logistics, games, operations people, spent a minimum, I would say, of 2 weeks on the ground in PyeongChang. First and foremost, working to support the athletes who were there training and competing in those test events. But just as importantly, gaining information and a familiarity with the region. Like, where do you go to find acetone to work on a bobsled runner or a luge runner? Where do you need to go to find hairdryer, believe it or not, for some of our figure skaters, okay? And we worked out all of those things in the year before the games, built the familiarity with the games and the environment to be able to react more quickly and adeptly when we were actually there in 2018. Secondarily, we gathered data. We gathered information that was going to prepare us and help us be better for the conditions of the Olympic Games. I referenced understanding the weather conditions, but we were looking at things like wind, environmental conditions in some of the venues, ice temperatures, humidity, so that we actually could come back to the United States and try to replicate those exact conditions in our speed skating venues to what we were going to see in PyeongChang, and some of our figure skating venues to what we were going to experience in PyeongChang, and provide specific training stimulus or a specific training environment to get the athletes ready for what it is they were going to see there. And then the third part of what we accomplished was just building relationships, both externally with people on the ground. There's people that you need to know when something goes wrong and you need to call in a favor and have something happen quick, but also building relationships with our coaches and our athletes. Kind of approach it from the perspective is that we don't want an athlete to ever encounter a new face when they walk into the Olympic Village out of the games. We took 2 years to actually put our USOC staff in front of athletes at camps and at events, so to build that familiarity, build that relationship, so that when an athlete stepped off the bus in Seoul or in Korea, they saw someone that they recognized, and that facilitates communication, conversation, breaks down a barrier to asking questions, and felt that that helped us in our ability to service the athletes' needs when they're on the ground in PyeongChang. Talk a little bit about sports psychology and the support that we've provided there. And it all comes down to building resilience and ability to perform under pressure. And again, kind of the Olympic Games are unlike any other, where that pressure, I think, is as much, if not greater, than you'll experience somewhere else, especially when you have a whole nation expecting you to go out and win a medal, and you haven't even done it yet. You've been crowned the champion even before you've stepped on the ice or stepped on the snow. So sports psychology is a critical component to how we prepare athletes for competition and performing at the games. We did really well in some areas, and we could do better in others. But one of the areas of, I'm going to call it pseudo-success, is in biathlon. I call it pseudo-success because we actually didn't win a medal in biathlon at the Olympic Games, even though we had several athletes that were capable of doing that. But the year prior, we won 2, which is the most that Team USA has ever won at a World Championships. Pardon me, it was at World Championships. And Lowell Bailey, the athlete shown here on the right, won the first ever gold medal at a World Championships. And a lot of it boils down to the improvements that these athletes were able to make over the last 4 to 8 years in their shooting, in their concentration, and their ability to perform under pressure. And Sean McCann, one of our sports psychologists, was embedded with that team and was an integral part of helping advance those athletes to the point where they could compete with the best in the world under those high pressure conditions. We got impacted by the weather and the wind and not making excuses, but it was too bad because those athletes were capable of actually winning what would have been the first medal ever for Team USA in the sport of biathlon at the Olympic Games. But we continue on. We'll talk about strength and conditioning. And I know it's a little bit ironic that this is a strength and conditioning conference and I'm talking about strength and conditioning kind of towards the end, but we've got a good crew of strength and conditioning coaches, both within our staff and kind of working with the national governing bodies. And I guess the example, what I want to call out here is just the way in which kind of strength and conditioning has helped change the culture within the sport of figure skating. Brandon Cycle, who's one of our strength coaches, he's here in the back, is an embedded provider, embedded strength coach with the national team in strength and figure skating, and has been working with a lot of their top athletes and kind of getting them entrenched in and kind of engaged in a strength and conditioning program that first and foremost focuses on injury prevention, but also targets athlete performance. And I guess the example that I want to give is Nathan Chen. Again, one of those feel-good, not-so-good stories. He finished 4th at the Olympic Games, but is the most talented skater in the world in terms of what he's able to accomplish. And you saw that in his free skate if you watched the Olympic Games, where he landed 6 quad jumps in one program, something that's never been done before, and I believe scored the highest score that anyone has ever received in the free skate. And his ability to do that is based on strength and conditioning, the work that he's been doing, like on the ice with his coach, but also in the weight room in terms of building the physical skills necessary in order to perform at that level. One of the conversations that we had with Nathan early on, and I'll remember this clearly for forever. He was new. He was an emerging junior, a very talented junior. And he sat in kind of our conference room. Brandon was there. We had members of U.S. figure skating there as well. And kind of talking through his strategy and his plan as how he's going to approach the next several years leading into the Olympic Games. And he was worried because the plan that was being proposed to him was going to mean that he had to give up something that was a part of his training. I believe it was actually hockey that he was going to have to maybe drop in order to do the other things that were supportive of his plan. And his question to us was, how am I going to replace that? What am I going to do to replace the work and the volume that I'm getting? 'Cause, it's important to me. I think it's important for my success as a figure skater. And one of us made the comment to him, it's like, what if you didn't do anything? And you just replaced that with rest and recovery and gave your body an ability to go and get ready for the next training session the next day. And it wasn't an instantaneous thing, but he's thought about that for a while. And a light switch flipped in his mind where he took a different approach to how he was going to look at figure skating and the work that he needed to be done and balancing recovery with work and being more intelligent about kind of how he did things, using some of the tools that we were providing and that figure skating was provided around things like jump counts and workload monitoring and just keeping track of that to make sure that we didn't get into a hole where he was overtrained. Now, not everything went perfectly, but Nathan became a stronger skater, a better skater because of the work done in strength and conditioning. And as it often happens, one athlete does something and achieves success, everybody else wants to know, how do I get on that train? And through that, we're seeing kind of a change in the view and the approach within U.S. figure skating and figure skating athletes of the importance that strength and conditioning can bring to an athlete in their performance, both from an injury prevention and a performance standpoint. So good things happening there. We'll talk quickly about sports medicine. And really, I think the big move outside of providing great service to the athletes and care that they need to recover from injuries is focusing on monitoring and tracking of key variables for athletes. Not every sport is kind of bought into this, and I'm sure that you all as strength coaches know that not every coach or every athlete out there embraces the concept of monitoring and tracking of data, but our luge team is one of those that has. And so for the past year and a half at least, athletes are completing daily wellness questionnaires. They're logging information related to testing. They're logging information related to injuries and workload. And it's helping us be able to provide a greater level of service and support to those teams and head things off before a small injury, before a small illness becomes a problem at some point down the road. So Chris Mazzer here as one of the medal-winning athletes is a part of that team. And I can't quote you any data that Chris had in the system, but I know that the luge team is one of our kind of groups that we'll hold up as an example of how this can be done, and they're used as an example for what we want some of the other winter sport teams to do along the way as we go through the next 4 years, getting ready for the Beijing Games. Analytics and performance. Again, this is an area where, I'll be honest with you, many other nations in the world are better in this than we are right now, but we're taking steps towards understanding the competitive landscape, both from what our competitors are doing and kind of what it takes to be successful on an international level, but also understanding our pipelines, okay, that athlete development and progression, that how you go from being an athlete at a junior level, an entry level into the sport, and progressing towards hopefully at some point being an Olympic medalist. So we're looking at things like performance pathways. And what this graph shows is taking the medalists from World Championship and Olympic Games over the last 12 years, going back in history and seeing at what age they accomplished some major performance milestones. starting with their first race in the International Bobsled Skeleton Federation circuit, looking at kind of their first junior world championships, when they first went on the senior World Cup level, if they won a medal at a World Cup, just tracking and seeing what the ages are that they hit these key markers. And that way we can look at an athlete who maybe hasn't reached the elite level yet, or that level where they're on a national team, and see if they're tracking towards that, which allows us to kind of get behind them, invest resources, both the USOC as well as the national governing body, because they're demonstrating features and factors that predict that they'll be on a path towards that podium. Maybe not tomorrow, but at some point in their future. Similarly, we can learn things about kind of how Team USA stacks up against trends in the rest of the world. And what we're looking at here is some data from men's skeleton. And at the top bar is kind of the age that they first begin in the sport. And then the bottom line is the age in which they compete in their first World Cup or senior level international competition. The green circle is international competitors that we face who have gone on to win a world championship or medal at an Olympic Games. The blue is international competitors who have competed at that level but have not won a world championship or Olympic medal. And then the red is Team USA athletes. And what you see is that Team USA is about 5 years behind our international competitors and top international competitors in terms of when they get those first experiences. So data's a challenging thing to work with, right? You can almost tell any story that you want to depending on how you work with the data. There's reasons why this looks the way it does, and that we attract older athletes into the sport as they maybe leave from track and field and are looking to do something once they graduate college. But it does tell a story, and maybe it guides and impacts our what it is that we do when we're looking for that next generation of skeleton athletes. Do we need to be looking at a younger athlete pool? And that question leads us into kind of another area, something that's pretty exciting, but we're just getting our feet wet at the Olympic Committee, and that's in this idea of talent identification and talent transfer. It always entertains me a little bit when people from other countries, coaches from other countries, decide that they're going to make a comment about how we do things here in the United States. And this is a comment from Gerard Anema, who is a Dutch speed skating coach, and this was made after the Olympic Games in 2014, where the Dutch won an insane number of medals and kind of felt that they could just say anything about anyone. But his comment was that you've got a lot of attention for a foolish sport like American football, and you waste a lot of talent, athletic talent, in a sport where you're meant to kill each other and injure each other. And when you compete once every 4 years at the Olympics with talent, you only have a few lone wolves who are skating, and you can't beat the world. It's no way. It's impossible. You're so narrow-minded that you waste a lot of talent in a sport that sucks. Okay? Got a chuckle out of that. And said, I'd love to line up all the football coaches and players on one side of the room and all the Dutch speed skaters and their coaches on the other side and say, go, and see who comes out at the end of it. But there actually is a pearl of wisdom in here, or there's a reality here. And it's that we have a lot of athletic talent in the United States that doesn't compete in Olympic sport. And so one of the beliefs that we have is that that talent, if it's identified, could transition over from a sport like football into an Olympic sport pretty successfully. You think about sport and you build up a certain set of skills, certain building blocks, if you will, in one sport, let's say track and field. Or I'll use the example here, distance running. And this athlete is Gwen Jorgensen, who was a tremendous, or not a tremendous, she was a good distance runner and had swimming in her background when she competed at University of Wisconsin. Developed a lot of skills that when she found the sport of triathlon, she could assemble those skills in a different way and actually produce something more beautiful, produce something better than she had in that initial sport that she had been a part of. And she went on to win a gold medal, if you recall, in the triathlon at the Rio Olympic Games. So you've got this whole concept of talent transfer and sport performance, and I've kind of made up a definition here that I'll read to you, but it's a process of talent identification and relocation that's based on the premise that skills that you develop in one sport can be transferred and are equally as applicable to another sport. And you see this happen somewhat regularly, although I'd argue that we don't facilitate this transfer as well as we could, or tap into the talent as well as we could here in the United States. But one great example is we have two roller sport inline skaters, Heather Richardson at the time, Heather Bergsman now, and Brittany Bowe, who were world championship medalists in the sport of inline skating, that then transitioned over and won multiple world championship medals in the sport of long track speed skating, and won their first medal in long track speed skating at an Olympic Games in PyeongChang just a couple of months ago. So you could say, that's ridiculous. It's speed skating going to speed skating. But the skill sets are actually different in terms of the technique that you use, that it is a talent transfer sport. And we see this happen quite regularly. Just going to the research, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but Collins has done some research into this talent transfer phenomena, or talent transfer effort, where he's identified sports as either donor sports or recipient sports. Donor sports being those that generate the talent that then transfers over to another sport, and those sports being the recipient sports. And you can see on here that athletics, football, basketball, alpine skiing, and rugby are the top, at least from the pool's examples that he drew from, top donor sports, whereas athletics, rowing, skiing, and cycling, as well as bobsled, are the top recipients of that talent. And I think that it's only a partial story that they tell, simply from the matter that they don't have gymnastics listed anywhere on that list as one of the donor sports. And here in the United States, we find that the skills, the body awareness, the overall athleticism that athletes build in gymnastics transfers very easily over into a number of sports, including aerial skiing. This is an athlete, Ashley Caldwell, who's represented Team USA in aerial skiing for the last 3 Olympic Games. She's a world champion the year prior to the Games. Another one of those were a year prior to the Games and then didn't medal at the Olympic Games. But she came over from the sport of gymnastics, was a level 10 gymnast, but didn't see herself, and her coaches didn't see herself going the path of an Olympic gymnast. So she transitioned over to aerial skiing. And in fact, it's a movement that we see happening over the last 10 years, where we're looking at the makeup of our national aerial skiing team. And the blue athletes, those blue names, are athletes that came over from another sport, came over from gymnastics, whereas the gray ones are athletes that started in the sport of aerial skiing and stayed there. So there's a shift, and it's a place where talent transfer is actually having an impact. And I would argue that our bobsled program is another one that benefits tremendously from talent transfer. This was our 2014 Olympic team, and every single athlete on our bobsled team in Sochi Olympic Games came from another sport. Whether it was Steve Holcomb, who came from the sport of alpine skiing. You had Alana Myers-Taylor, who was a softball player. And within that, you have football, track and field, even baseball, volleyball, of athletes who had successfully transferred, developed skills in one sport that they transferred over into another. Now, bobsled's not stupid. They've recognized this, and they hold combines or testing events throughout the country. Our friends at East Tennessee State here, they hold a regular bobsled combine and support this program through testing and other support. But they run athletes through a series of physical tests, identified skills that are related to performance in bobsled, namely speed, strength, power. And they move around the country trying to identify talent that they can bring into the sport of bobsled, and pretty successfully. One of the things that we're trying to do is partner with them to really expand this. They're doing a good job, but I think you can blow this out and can be even better, especially if we look at the talent in the NCAA system and the athletes that are retiring from sport there, trying to tap into that and expanding the reach of this program. We're trying to develop posters and kind of promotional materials. It's as much about education as it is about identifying talent. And so we've actually developed some, and if you're interested and want to grab a couple at the back on your way out, the idea would be put it up in your weight room, put it up in your facility, start spreading the news and letting athletes know that there are opportunities for them to participate in an Olympic sport that they might not have been aware of. And just so you know, we had a lot of retirements in our bobsled and skeleton teams this year, and so there's an opening, or there are openings and opportunities for athletes to get involved. I guess the last thing that I'll mention in terms of our efforts to kind of do or to identify new talent is the Next Olympic Hopeful program, which we launched last year. It was a talent identification event / television show. with our marketing department to try to find athletes that could move from one sport or that were unidentified, and give them an opportunity to show, do some testing under the eyes of some of our Olympic sport coaches to see if they had the skills that could transition them over to a national team. We brought almost 100 athletes to Colorado Springs, ran them through a battery of tests. 33 got an opportunity to go on and get another look from one of the NGBs that participated. And of those, there's probably 5 that are still in the system and have a legitimate shot of making a national team for a national governing body. Athletes that were off the radar prior to this testing that would have never maybe found their way to a sport like bobsled or a sport like rugby. We're doing the next version in another week, 10 days. We've done in the field talent identification tests with a couple of our Olympic Training Center partners like East Tennessee State and the Olympic Legacy Foundation and the Oklahoma City Boathouse. Helped with some testing, and then people submitted information and testing on their own. We picked 100 athletes that'll come to Colorado Springs in another week. We expanded the number of sports that are involved in the program. But again, it's another effort to try to identify talent, and we'd love to partner with any of you or talk with any of you that are interested in getting involved in this space and helping us grow this talent identification efforts, these initiatives, because we do believe there are athletes out there, there's talent out there that can help us be better as Team USA. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I think I'm at time, so apologies. I don't have a lot of time. I don't think I can field questions from the podium, but I'll be hanging around. And also have Brandon in the back who's happy to answer questions if you have them for us about what we do at the Olympic Training Center at the USOC and supporting our winter sport athletes. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I really enjoy your attention and appreciate you being here. So thanks.